It's impossible to talk about pop and rock music without talking about one instrument. And when I was putting together this episode and looking back over 3+ years of episodes that I've done here on the channel, it's amazing how this one instrument basically appears somewhere with all of these artists. And of course, the instrument I'm talking about is a guitar. You can trace rock's roots by looking at guitars and guitar players. There was Woody Guthrie, then there was the great Chet Atkins and Les Paul. Now, things really exploded when Elvis Presley appeared on TV with a guitar slung around his neck, and he started to sing and play. But you watch it, and that guitar, he's not much of a guitar player at this point. That guitar is more of a prop than really an instrument for him. But it did capture everybody's imagination. Then in 1960s, the folk music exploded, and the guitar was everywhere. Of course, you had Peter and Paul of Peter, Paul and Mary both playing guitars. You had Bob Dylan playing guitar. You had Johnny Cash playing guitar. And Dolly Parton. And of course, you had Joan Baez and Joni Mitchell. And you had the Kingston Trio playing guitars. Guitars were everywhere. And on the blues scene, you had B.B. King and many, many more. Now, I have a theory on why guitar has absolutely exploded in popular music. Now, this is an ad from the Sears Roebuck catalog in 1963, and that is the guitar that I first bought. It was a flat top acoustic guitar with very bad action, and it cost under 16 bucks. I no longer own that guitar, and here is my trusty old Stella 12-string that I got when I was 17 years old. Now, the reason that I think that guitars became so popular was that almost anybody could play them. All you had to do was figure out 3 chords, G, C, and D7th, and you could play a whole lot of folk songs. And so everyone kind of gravitated to the guitar. And then, of course, everything changed when the Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show with 2 guitars, a left-handed bass player, who'd ever seen that, and drums. And all of a sudden, every kid throughout the world decided that they wanted an electric guitar, and of course, I did too. Now, the Beatles definitely expanded on those 3 chords, and guitar playing went crazy. You had the incredible technical virtuosity and pyrotechnics of Jimi Hendrix. You had the windmill playing of Pete Townshend of The Who and smashing his guitars. And then you had Eric Clapton playing all of those great leads to where people in England were actually writing on the walls that Clapton is God. Now, for every one of us would-be guitarists and musicians who picked up the instrument back then with dreams in our head and ambition to do things, we all owe a debt of gratitude to a band that came out of Tacoma, Washington. And I think history has kind of forgotten about them a little bit, and they really deserve a whole lot more credit. Now, they actually started before classic rock, and then they evolved through it. And I know this channel is supposed to talk about classic rock, but they were an integral part of what ended up creating the classic rock period. They sold over 100 million records, which made them the 6th top-selling album artist in the 1960s. And they did all this without even having a singer. Yeah, they were an instrumental band. And they sure had a lot of hits over the years. So are you ready? Let's walk, don't run. Let's drop the needle on the Ventures. The band was formed in 1958 by 2 friends, Don Wilson and Bob Bogle, who discovered a love for guitars, and so they went out and bought 2 used guitars from a pawn shop. They called themselves the Versatones, and they started playing around clubs in the Pacific Northwest. But when they decided to register the name, they discovered, somebody already had it. And then one of their mothers said, well, I have an idea. Why don't you call yourselves the Ventures? And so they did. The classic lineup of the band includes Wilson on rhythm guitar, Bogle on lead guitar and then later bass, Nokie Edwards on bass and then eventually lead guitar, and Mel Taylor on drums. Although over the years they did have some personnel changes, but this is the classic lineup. Now, Bogle owned a Chet Atkins album, which was called Hi-Fi in Focus, and he really liked one song on that record, which was Walk, Don't Run. So he learned it and showed it to the rest of the band, and they decided they would cut it as a single. Whew. Man, was it a hit. It sold over 1 million copies. Between 1960 and 2023, the Ventures recorded 53 albums. These are just some of them. I'm not going to discuss all the albums, but I will hit on a few. Their debut album is called Walk, Don't Run, to capitalize on the single. And it's interesting, look at the cover here, in that you have the model in the forefront and then the 4 musicians stumbling over their instruments and falling behind her. If you look closely, those people are not actually the Ventures, because the Ventures were out on tour when this photo was taken for the album. So they don't have a singer, the Ventures don't have a singer on the record, and their image doesn't appear on the record either. But their talent certainly does. Besides the hit Walk, Don't Run, I like Raunchy, which every guitarist had to learn. And interesting story, this is the song that George Harrison first played to John Lennon. And it impressed John enough that he said to the young, inexperienced George, all right, you can join the group. The rest is history, and it all started with Raunchy. I also like Night Train, Caravan, and Sleepwalk. It hit number 11 on the charts. As we go through the history of the Ventures, we'll see that they were really pretty incredible pioneers in a number of areas in the early days of rock music. In 1961, they actually recorded one of the first concept albums, way before anybody had thought of Tommy or Sgt. Pepper's or any of that. And it was called The Colorful Ventures, and every song revolved around a theme. In 1962, to capitalize on the twist dance phase, they released Twist with the Ventures, and it stays on the charts for 29 weeks and peaks at number 24. Now, as I said, the Ventures were pioneers in a number of areas. In 1962, a good 2 years before Dave Davies of the Kinks, in a rebellious mood, decided to take a razor blade and slice the speakers in his amp to create the fuzz for You Really Got Me, the Ventures had already used fuzz tone on a song called The 2,000 Pound Bee. The Ventures were also one of the first groups to use a 12-string guitar in pop and rock music. They also were one of the first acts to use space-sounding effects when they recorded a song called Telstar, and it's one of the first songs to use an effect called flanging, which gives you that whoosh, whooshing kind of sound as things go in and out of phase on the recording. And last but not least, every electric guitarist has the Ventures to thank, because it's probably them who introduced all of us to the whammy bar and what we could do with that when we played electric guitar. In 1963, they released an album called Telstar and the Lonely Bull. And the band, again pushing the envelope a little bit, decides to take advantage of this new technique called stereo recording, and they separate the instruments to the left and right channel, giving them a much bigger, fuller sound than most records that came out around that time. On this album, besides Telstar and Lonely Bull, I like Apache, Tequila, and their cover of Green Onions. That same year, the band agreed to a licensing deal with a guitar manufacturer called Mosrite Guitars. And Mosrite was going to make custom guitars just for the Ventures, which became a very popular item for the company. They were churning out these guitars by the hundreds. They made guitars, they made bass guitars, and they were called Ventures models. And the Ventures continued this licensing agreement until 1968, only playing exclusively until that time Mosrite guitars. The Ventures toured extensively over the years, and they made their first tour to Japan in 1964, and they went back a number of times. In fact, the Ventures were so popular in Japan, it is said that they actually outsold the Beatles by a ratio of 2-1. And they started a whole craze in Japan where young Japanese kids wanted electric guitars. In 1965, they had a single called Diamond Head. Didn't do too well in the US, but it was a huge hit overseas, and it became the first million-selling single in Japan. They continued to put out a number of records, and in 1966, they decided to change a little bit and go for a mod sound, and they put out an album called Wild Things. And yes, it includes Wild Thing, Wild Child, Summer in the City, and Hanky Panky. It was on the charts for 26 weeks, peaking at number 33. In 1969, they released an album called Hawaii Five-0, capitalizing on the very popular TV show and using the theme song as one of the big songs on the album. Besides Hawaii Five-0 as the title song, there's Theme from a Summer Place, their cover of The Letter, and Aquarius Let the Sun Shine In. The album stays on the charts for 24 weeks and tops out at number 11. But in the dawn of the 1970s, interest in the Ventures music in the U.S. starts to decline. But they're still extremely popular in Japan. Part of their attraction to worldwide audiences was there was no language barrier to overcome. And that's probably one of the reasons they were such a big hit in Japan. And then an interesting thing happens. Punk music comes along, and the punk music artists discover surf music. And all of a sudden, the Ventures have a resurgence in popularity. In 2008, the Ventures were inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame by none other than John Fogerty of Creedence Clearwater Revival. Now, as usual, I've created a Spotify playlist where you can listen to some of the songs that I've talked about in this episode. And here's the link, and I'll also put it in the comments below. Now, as I said, there have been personnel changes through the Ventures over the years, and in fact, there's a group of the Ventures still out touring today, but with none of the original members. So if we go back and look at the classic lineup, here's what happened to those four groundbreaking artists. Mel Taylor, the drummer, died in 1966. He was only 62 years old. Then Bob Bogle died in 2009. He was 75. Nokie Edwards died in 2018. He was 82. And Don Wilson died in 2022. He was 88. So when you go back over the years, and I would suggest that you actually look at some of these albums I didn't talk about. After all, 53 albums. And it's interesting because, as I said, they're purely instrumental, and they're really doing a lot of covers of everything else. But they take the song and essentially make it their own. And they were pioneers in a lot of technical breakthroughs in how all of us learned to play the guitar. Thank you, Ventures. It's been a wild ride. We learned to walk, but we won't run. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep it rocking. If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.